Do you think President Putin this time is more relaxed in terms of his directions of building a new foreign policy for Russia, given that the new president in the United States is rather rhetorically, at least, friendly with Russia?
Well, President Putin is always pretty relaxed. But this time what is important is the international part of his speech was very short. It was like maybe less than 1/4 of the entire speech. So he mainly devoted his speech to internal problems and the internal development. But the international part, yes, he basically said that Russia is, he said we were not looking for enemies, we were looking for friends, but we are not going to give up on our principles. So the message was, if someone wants to be friends with us, for example, the West, we are going to be friendly. If you don't want to, so that's up to you. But of course, it would be much better if relations improved.
Well, we'll see what kind of friends President Putin is trying to refer to. Of course, different countries have their different bottom lines. President Putin this time said in his speech that Russia is ready to cooperate with the new U.S. leadership next year. We can see on our screen the specific quote coming from President Putin. Going to you, Mr. Henning, how Washington has been responding to this? And I understand this news just came out, but I'm sure Washington is watching very closely as to what President Putin is saying.
Well, absolutely. I mean, I think, look, it was a very disciplined speech by President Putin. It was tactically very successful in de-emphasizing international conflict and kind of the previous strategic dimensions of some of his other State of the Nation speeches. I think he's certainly, obviously hoping for a, quote, sort of detente in relations with the incoming President-elect Trump administration. Obviously, it's too early to tell how a lot of these things are going to shake out, but from a tactical point of view, he's certainly created some space for an improvement of relations. There are, of course, a lot of reasons why relations were have reached this negative level, and we'll see over the first months of the Trump administration how those are addressed in the bilateral relationship and in context of some of our multilateral commitments.
Mr. Henning, of course, during the speech, President Putin from Russia was trying to brush off some of the accusations coming from the Western countries, particularly the United States, for example, Russia involved in others' internal affairs, for example, in Syria and also in Crimea. Russia was trying to interfere in the general election of the United States, an accusation against Russia earlier, just a few months ago, by the United States, and some of the other things. But do you think Mr. Donald Trump, even when he comes into the office anew, will be able to just say, swipe away all of these earlier accusations and mend the fences with Moscow, just like that?
Well, certainly he'll make that effort. Obviously, having the Republican Party controlling both the House and the Senate as well as the presidency makes it easier for him to have a united front on these issues. That said, there's a high level of discontent in Washington among Democrats. In the Senate, they have the ability to make a lot of noise around these issues. I don't expect they'll go away. I don't expect President Trump would immediately be able to change the entire course of the relationship. But certainly he has the ability to reset the agenda, if not the entire tenor of the relationship, and I expect he'll do that.
How much expectation, Professor Lukin, is Moscow having at this moment, reflected by President Putin's speech this time, that it is having the possibility of really mending fences with Washington? Or should we read the vagueness in President Putin's speech in the other direction, which is Russia really doesn't know and is not sure?
If you mean by Russia, the Russian leadership, I think it doesn't have any expectations, because it's pretty cautious about it. about the new leadership. Because, as you remember, probably previous presidents, for example, Mr. Obama was also very positive about Russia at first, and he proposed the reset in relations, but later he probably came under pressure, just was a weak president, and everything was not as good as it was at the beginning. So Mr. Trump, of course, said a lot of good things about Russia, that he wanted to cooperate. Even if he manages to fulfill at least one half of it, it would be very good. But one cannot be sure about it, because apart from the president and his ideas, there are a lot of other people. He has to deal with the Congress, with all kinds of lobbies. And so we are just... I think that Russia is now taking the wait-and-see position. And that's exactly what Mr. Putin said. He said, we are ready to cooperate, we are looking for friends, but if you don't want to have a friend, then it's up to you, that's your choice.
Mr. Yang in Beijing, of course, the relations between countries are about interests.
Yeah.
The question is, which one needs the other more? Russia needs the United States more at this moment, when the EU still have sanctions against Russia, when Russia still have problems dealing with some of the perceptions the West at least has about itself, or the United States needs Russia more because of serious issues, because of some of the other global anti-terrorism issues. Who needs the other more? Probably that would help us understand better about the realities.
Well, that's a really complex question, just like a question of a comparison between apple and pears. And between powers, the relationship is very sophisticated. And now, in my view, there have been gradually become a strategic triangle relation between China, Russia, and the United States. Both Russia and China try to develop independently, develop a relationship with U.S. while strengthening the comprehensive cooperation between Beijing and Moscow. Of course, the president-elected Trump also send a positive signal to Moscow. They also have a phone talks with President Putin and President Xi Jinping. So let's look. I share the feeling with my Russian colleagues. Just wait and see.
Right.
Both the President Putin and President Xi Jinping send signals, and Trump say something positive. But he said that when he was not the president. So just wait and see.
All right, Mr. Yang, a question to follow up. When you talk about the triangle relationship, of course, whichever party moves a bit from the original position would always cause reactions from the other two parties.
Yeah.
That's what triangle is about, right? Isn't it?
Yeah.
So if Russia and the United States, as rhetorically as Mr. Trump, the presidential-elect, talked about during his campaign, come a bit or even more closer than it used to be, what would that mean for China? Is China already trying to process this possibility?
That would be mixed effects on China's foreign policy. If Moscow and Washington goes too closer, China will feel bigger pressures. But by the same token, if Beijing, Washington goes closer, or Moscow, Beijing goes closer, the pressures will go to the other side. So basically, that is dynamics of interactions among the three players,
right,
affecting not only the three individual bilateral, but also affecting the global stabilization or instabilization.
That's why everybody is listening also very closely as to what President Putin has to say about Russia-China relations. In fact, Professor Lukin, President Putin seemed to suggest that is quite a model for a strategic partner relationship between China and Russia. How would you interpret that, really?
Well, absolutely. Russia and China have kind of model cooperation which can be used by other countries. We don't have much differences on any international issues. We have strategic partnership with China, And basically, let me agree with President Xi Jinping, who said many times that it's a new era in foreign relationship. I don't agree very much with the people who are talking about triangle. There are not no triangle anymore. We should talk about in terms that if two of the angles go together, one should worry about it. We should talk about the win-win cooperation. We should talk about cooperation between the three countries. And Russia and China understand it very well, but the American administration, the previous or the current administration, did not understand that quite a lot. It was doing actually pursuing a very strange kind of policy, which was criticized by many experts, beginning from Henry Kissinger. It was worsening relations with both Russia and China simultaneously. This was very strange. I hope that the new administration will change this attitude and will pursue also a win-win policy. Actually, we are going to have in January, one day before the inauguration, a very interesting Russian-Chinese-American conference in Washington on CSIS, which is an important think tank in Washington. And we will be trying to look for this trilateral to issues in which the three countries could cooperate. I hope our leaders can listen to this suggestion, to such proposal.
I hope some of the talking points during the conference will eventually go into the inauguration speech made by President-elect Trump. But we don't know about that, though. But let me go to you, Mr. Henning. You were listening attentively to your other two colleagues. What would that say to the Trump administration? At this moment, sir, we understand Mr. Trump, together with his team, is now trying to select key members of his cabinet. At this moment, we see the rich and the powerful from the United States mainly are in the cabinet, whether it's Treasury, Commerce, or some of the other key posts. What does that say possibly about the future directions the Trump administration likely to take? Is he likely to be what he has promised, somewhat at least, during his campaign?
Well, look, I think it's really too early to tell. A lot depends on who gets slated into some of the top positions, namely the Secretary of State and Secretary of Defense positions. I think, though, broadly looking at the Secretary of Commerce, Secretary of Treasury, and some things that have been rolled out, I agree with my colleagues. I think there's not only an opportunity to look at some win-win relationships between these three countries, but really to take to do away with the idea of a zero-sum triangle between these countries. I think this administration coming in is going to be focused on economic development, investment, and trade. I don't think they're going to be guided by large macro concepts. I don't think there's going to be a lot of, by their own admission, I mean, what we can glean thus far, it's not going to be a lot of big strategic overarching concepts about how they do that. That said, I think it's going to be very transactional.
All right.
I think given President-elect Trump's background coming out of business and thinking in very transactional terms, I think that's going to be a big change. I think that could open up some opportunities. I think it's going to make other aspects of bilateral, multilateral relationships a lot more complex.
If it is transactional, then it has a lot to do with the economic realities of all countries, the three of the countries, China, Russia, and the United States. Professor Lukin, in the speech delivered by President Putin, he talked a lot about the internal economic situation of Russia. We understand that has been a big problem, even though he is so much favored by the Russians, 80% approval rating, but the economy has always been the pain point for him. Do you see any key point that you brought up is likely to change the overall picture of Russia's economic problems and challenges, depending too much on oil, state-owned enterprises reform, and oligarchy, and many of the factors that we have been talking about earlier?
Well, I think it's important to note, and often this gets over.
Let's have Professor Lukin. Sorry.
Oh, okay. So President Putin was very positive about the economy, and that's natural because he's the state leader, so maybe a little bit over optimistic. But at the same time, the situation is not bad. The thing is that there's no crisis or anything like that in the economy. But what we lack here in Russia is growth, kind of growth that China had for a long time. And for that, there is a lot of discussions in Russia among Russian economists, but there is no final decision of what exactly, what exact course should be pursued, what kind of reforms we need. President Putin said some things. For example, he was talking about the reforms of some reforms of the economic system, but he was not very specific.
Right.
For example, tax system. He said that we should reform the tax system, but he didn't say in what way. Like, should we raise the taxes or should we lower the taxes? So I think the final decision is not made yet.
Right. Well, Mr. Yang in Beijing, final point for you as well. We long understand that the relations between China and Russia over the past few years has been the political will has always preceded the economic cooperation realities.
Yep.
So China, Russia thinking about Eurasia, cooperating, trade mechanism cooperation, but never really get there, the expectations.
Yep.
So what can be done after listening to President Putin's words during this address?
Well, I think when Putin pay more attention to the domestic economic situation, I think the room for cooperation between the Moscow and the Beijing is getting larger in economic area, especially besides the trade investment. The two capital will open a cooperation and a coordination on macroeconomic policies, because President Putin say a lot about macroeconomic problems, and so that China has this, of course, different macroeconomic problems. The two countries have exchanges, views, and experiences, and also have some economic policy coordinations for enhancing the bilateral investment and trade.